Geomaxing, in its simplest form, is the act of traveling to a different country in order to improve your quality of life. But usually the primary goal of geomaxing for a man is to improve his dating odds. And the general idea is that an average American or European man, especially a white man, that might have a very low sexual market value in their home country, if they just move to Southeast Asia or somewhere else, they might have a lot more success in dating because relatively they will be considered wealthy there. And there's also the idea that the women in a lot of these countries idolize white men. So overall dating will just be a lot easier. But aside from dating, geomaxing might also be talked about for financial reasons, just for the fact that you can live off of a much lower income in certain countries. So even without considering dating prospects, geomaxing is something that might appeal to certain men that don't make a lot of money or men that want to retire early. And there's also cultural reasons for geomaxing. A lot of men want to live somewhere with more traditional values compared to Western society, and they think they'll fit in better in some foreign societies. And I get comments from time to time asking me if I've ever considered geomaxing or just asking my thoughts on the matter, and it is something I've thought about, so I figured I'd make this video. And I'm going to start by talking about whether or not I think geomaxing is a good strategy, including specifically what I think the pros and cons are, and I'm also going to talk about specifically if I think geomaxing is a good strategy for the sub-5 man. And then I'll talk about which countries I think might be good for geomaxing and which countries probably aren't so good. So let's get right to the point. Do I think geomaxing is actually a valid strategy for a sub-5 man to find more success in dating? No, I don't think so. I do believe that different parts of the world have somewhat different standards as to what makes a person physically attractive, but if you are a true sub-5, then you're still going to be sub-5 in the Philippines or Bolivia or wherever else you go in the world. Sub-5 status is universal. Now, I do think you might be able to attract a very low-quality gold digger in certain countries just by being white. So if all you care about is sex, then yeah, you might have better chances of getting laid in Southeast Asia compared to the US or Europe. But I'm still not 100% convinced even that that would work for a true sub-5. I mean, if you're a sub-3, then forget about it. But if you're just sub-5, and if you're able to present an appearance of wealth, then I think you could increase your chances. And I also think height will help out even more in certain countries. You know, being 6'2" in Vietnam is probably the equivalent of being 6'8" or something in America. So I think geomaxing might be a valid strategy for certain sub-5 men, and it really just depends. And for men that aren't sub-5, you know, if you're normie tier or better and you just can't find success in your home country due to the hyperinflated dating standards of the West, then I do think there's a pretty good chance you'll have more success in some other countries. But when it comes to myself, like, do I think geomaxing could be a valid strategy for me? The answer is absolutely not. And this will probably come as no surprise to most of you if you've ever seen any of my videos, but the reason I think geomaxing would be useless for me is because of my high inhibition. And I think in general, you need to be low inhibition for geomaxing to work. If you struggle to communicate in your home country, it's going to be 10 times worse when you're in a foreign country where everybody speaks a foreign language and they have different social customs. And it's not just the language barrier. I mean, that is a huge part of it, but even if you're fluent in the language of whatever country you're trying to geomax in, just the foreign nature of everything, like the way making a doctor's appointment is different or paying for parking is different and stuff like that, that kind of foreign environment, it's just too much for a high inhibition male to handle. I already damn near have a panic attack just trying to go to a new dentist in my own hometown. How do you think I would handle day-to-day life in Costa Rica or Romania? There's no chance. It would be over before it ever even began. I would be in a constant state of panic. And even if, say, I managed to get a date on Tinder or whatever, when we actually meet up in person in a public place, I'm just going to freeze. And I'd probably freeze up out of fear anyways, but in a foreign environment where I don't even know how physically safe I am, because most of the popular geomaxing countries are more dangerous than the US, In that environment, I could not possibly relax. And the thing you got to understand about life as a high inhibition male, what high inhibition means is that I am always overanalyzing every little thing to the point I freeze up in fear. And what brings that fear on, the thing that is the driving force behind high inhibition struggles, it's the uncertainty. So, which environment do you think has a larger amount of uncertainty? My home country where I've lived my entire life? Or some random foreign country I know very little about? I would stand absolutely no chance in any foreign country. Because of my ultra high inhibition, for me, geomaxing is absolutely out of the question. Geomaxing is a low inhibition man's game. Because I do think geomaxing will probably work for the average man, and I think it might work in some cases for a sub 5 man if he is low inhibition. And that is key. If you're high inhibition, geomaxing is out of the question. There's no way. It just won't work. So I do think geomaxing can be a valid way for some men to improve their dating life. And for sure, it can be a good idea for some people financially. Like, obviously, cost of living is much lower in certain countries. So I'm not even going to bother talking about that. But some of the reasons that people give for geomaxing are just outright moronic. So let's talk about that. Because whenever you hear people talking about geomaxing, there's always going to be some idiot talking about traditional values and saying things like, the women in Asia actually respect men, not like these liberal whores in the West. And I'm just not buying it. I'm not the most well-traveled guy, so I don't have much first-hand experience, but I just don't think people are really that much different anywhere you go. You know, I grew up in the South, and for a few years when I actually had a good job, I lived in a big city in another part of the country, and the neighborhood I lived in there was actually a majority immigrant neighborhood with a lot of Eastern Europeans, Muslims, and Hispanic people. And even though I wasn't really going out and doing a lot of socializing, or really any socializing, I do think I lived there long enough that I was able to get a good impression of how the people were, and to my estimations, the people there were exactly the same as the people from where I grew up. So I just don't believe that the cultural values of a place really have all that much effect on actual human behavior. You know, I truly believe that the conservative Muslim girl from Indonesia is just as likely to cheat on you as the blue-haired, sexually liberated girl boss in New York City. And that is a black pill that a lot of people are resistant to. And I understand why, you know, obviously we all try to cope with certain beliefs, and one of the easiest copes to hold on to is the belief that somewhere out there in the world there exists a place where the women are not only beautiful, but they actually have morals and integrity and traditional values. Because the alternative is that you have to accept that all the conniving, steak-like, hypergamous, self-serving behavior you see in your home country, you have to accept that that's just human nature. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But I do think that's the reality of the situation. And this might be unpopular, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't think most of these things are unique to female nature. I think things like hypergamy, lack of moral fiber, I think these things are just human nature. Women are just able to exhibit these aspects of human nature more freely because our society allows them to act that way. And I know a lot of you don't agree with this, but I think I'm above average in terms of self-awareness, and a lot of the evil or negative traits that are often ascribed only to women, I can recognize those traits in myself at times. Like with hypergamy, that's just an extension of selfishness, and I see that from every person I've ever met. And yes, I do see it in myself as well, but I'm not going to preach to you too much about human nature and the differences or similarities between men and women. I'm just saying all of this to make the point that if you're considering geomaxing for cultural reasons, I think you're going to end up severely disappointed. So if you want to move to another country for financial reasons, or if you're a low inhibition sub 5 man and you want to try to improve your chances of actually getting laid, then I say go ahead and try it. I don't think it's definitely going to work out for you if you're a true sub 5, but it might. I think you probably would at least have better chances. Now, as far as where you should go to geomax, I think the best place is probably Southeast Asia. For one thing, your money is going to go a lot further there than in most places, and for the cost of living you get there, it's probably the safest part of the world you could live in. Some places in South or Central America might also have really low cost of living, but they're also a lot more dangerous. And I'm sure there are some dangerous areas in Vietnam or whatever, but you never hear about the Vietnamese cartel cutting off people's heads with a chainsaw, so I'm guessing that Southeast Asia is just a safer place to live. But I know crime isn't the only thing you need to worry about because things like natural disasters and traffic infrastructure, these things are also things you should consider. If you live in Thailand, you should probably learn a thing or two about what to do in case of a tsunami. And look up a video of people crossing the street in Vietnam. It's ridiculous. It's like they just don't have any traffic rules at all over there, and everybody rides motorcycles, and I haven't read any statistics, but I'm just going to assume you're about 11 times more likely to die in a traffic accident in Vietnam than you would be in any Western nation. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think Eastern Europe could also be a good place for geomaxing, especially if you are particularly into white women, because, some Eastern European countries, they do have lower costs of living. And from what I hear, women's standards in those countries might be more similar to women in Southeast Asia. But again, you need to make sure you know about the crime statistics and all that before you move somewhere, because a lot of these Eastern European countries might be just as dangerous as Colombia or Mexico.